how to use trigger event selling. In this video, which has been taken from the salesman.org archives, you're going to learn what a trigger event actually is and how you can leverage it to get in front of those really difficult to reach prospects that you're calling, emailing, and get no response from. Trigger events allows you to get in front of them pretty freaking easily. The dissatisfaction gap gets created when a buyer experiences a trigger event. And trigger events are environmental changes which create a cascade of change. Up until the point at which a trigger event puts people into action, most individuals are just going to keep doing what they've always done. And that is the power of being locked into the status quo. Now, to smash through the status quo and to get a deal done, trigger events are what get people thinking a little bit differently. Because once your competitor launches a product which is miles better than yours, for example, this is a trigger event for you. You're going to snap out your own status quo. And for example, if your CTO leaves the organization to do charity work and they were the only ones with any sudden idea of how your product actually worked, then there's going to be a trigger event for your company. They're going to take action. If perhaps your CRM system crashes and you lose all of the data on all of your previous customers and everything that you're trying to do to move forward towards your sales target right now, again, the whole business falls into a dissatisfaction gap at that moment. So there were some examples of some internal trigger events that you might face, but a potential customer might face trigger events such as new heavy government regulation coming in and hitting them, a competitor going bust and 30% of the marketplace just being without any supplier whatsoever, or perhaps a competitor to them launching a product which changes their own marketplace. We'll go on forever, and we'll get into the 4 specific types of trigger events in a minute. But before that, a trigger event doesn't occur when a buyer's experience just incrementally changes, just changes a slight little bit, especially over the longer term, which leads to a new situation. A trigger event only happens when massive change happens overnight in one moment. Think of this like the idea, which I don't think is true, I think this is complete nonsense, but think of this as the idea of the tale of putting a frog in a pan of cold water, then heating the water up on the stove. The story goes that the frog won't jump out, won't notice the incremental changes and eventually it'll boil to death. But pretty confident it will jump out at some point. But that's how your buyers live and your potential partners live. They live in this boiling vat of water that when they first started in the role, everything was okay, there's a bit of pain, but then the pain incrementally increases up to a point where it's almost not manageable, but that's the status quo. They won't take action to move away from that. However, if you take this cold pan and you dump a load of boiling water into it, if there's instant change, then they'll come out of the status quo and they will take action to wherever you're trying to share with them. So what we're looking for in trigger events in the real world is a change that disrupts the pre-existing pattern of behavior in our potential customers. Or it makes it very difficult for the buyer or potential customers to continue following the pattern that they were previously running. Think of it as your partner throwing divorce papers across the kitchen table randomly one morning as you're having your breakfast, rather than just a couple of people comfortably and being happy to grow apart over the decades and get a divorce after 30 years. We're looking for industry shaking events or company shaking events, and they are what we're going to consider trigger events. Because trigger events are important because they raise the level of emotion in an account, in a relationship, in a person's job. And people are primed to make changes in their life when there's high levels of emotion. Additionally, when emotion is high, there's very likely a significant change in the person's outlook, their view on things as well. So let's get more specific now. Let's run through the 4 main types of trigger events that all of the trigger events can be categorized down into. Now remember, we're not looking for circumstances that change over the long term here. We're only looking for specific acute events that have led buyers to fall into one of these categories. Number 1, just general bad experiences. So if the buyer has just had a bad experience and becomes really unhappy, then their emotions are likely going to be running very high. And it's time for us to speak with them. We're looking for something that's disrupted or undermined the buyer's relationship with their current supplier. And this could be an unpleasant change in the product or the specifications of a product, for example. Number 2, we're looking at internal changes. So internal changes within a buyer's organization is often a trigger event. It could be a change in the company's location, a change in people, priorities, or anything else that makes the current status quo now unmanageable. And if you've been selling for more than a couple of years, I'm sure you will have experienced this firsthand. And I've experienced this as well. I've desperately been trying to break into a competitor account. You're adding value, you're doing everything that we talk about here at salesman.org, but there's just no movements. Nothing's happening, no matter what you do. Then suddenly, all of a sudden, the person who's been blocking you and stopping your calls getting through and just been kiboshing every effort that you've been attempting to put some value into this account, well, they leave the organization and you're back in the game. The most obvious occasions for this is when individuals change companies or move within an account. If one manager gets a promotion or gets sidetracked into another project, whatever it is. But this can also come politically as well from the organization if the priorities of the organization change from the top down. So for example, a computer company might just overnight decide to stop producing hardware and only focus on software. Immediately, this is a huge trigger event. People are going to be getting laid off. The whole company's priorities have shifted, and so you need to get in there and find the dissatisfaction gap if this is a potential partner for you. Number 3, we have awareness. So the awareness trigger event gets created by something the prospector sees, something that they hear, or something that they read about. And you can trigger these yourself with great content and by sharing surprising insights with your potential partners. This happens, the buyer suddenly gets a new perspective on the marketplace. Their emotions start running high and perhaps they become willing to engage with you. And you cannot trigger this trigger event by being better, faster, or cheaper. These levers do not trigger enough emotion to knock someone out of the status quo. It's got to be a mindset shift that this individual is making that will open the doors for you. And finally, we have 4 catastrophic events. So a catastrophic trigger event could be any one of the previous 3 trigger events, but this one is held in its own category because immediately it displaces your competition. It displaces the status quo. So if a brand that you'd like to sell into is bought by another company, or the CEO is sacked because some kind of sex scandal, whatever it is, you need to be first in the door in these moments. And these events might only happen to a large organization once every decade or so. And so it's incredibly important that you're paying attention because it's like winning the lottery. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click subscribe, leave a comment below what you thought about the video and the content itself, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video.